the United States is attempting to either threaten or wage actual war against this rising multipolar world. So let's start with Iran. So here's the announcement of this secondary sanctions on any country that trades and buys oil from Iran. But that's not all. We had who many people are calling drunken Pete Hegseth. He announced this. He said, "Message to Iran: we see your lethal support," in all caps, to the Houthis. "We know exactly what you're doing. You know very well what the U.S. military is capable of, and you were warned. You will pay the consequence at the time in place of our choosing." Now, not unsurprisingly, the negotiations between the United States and Iran have been postponed. And then lastly, we had this vaunted minerals deal, which is really not about minerals at all. In it, it blames Putin for the invasion of Russia. Sound familiar? Donald Trump is finally blamed, according to the minerals deal leaked to the Telegraph, Russia for the war in Ukraine. It states the United States of America has provided significant financial and material support to Ukraine since Russia's full-scale invasion. I know you have just covered too that arms sales to Ukraine are moving forward from the U.S. So talk about this many-front war, because it seems like Trump is attempting to pivot toward China, but yet it is attempting also to confront all three of these rising powers to the east at the same time.
The U.S. is at war with the multipolar world. And if you want to simplify it even further, it's at war against peace and prosperity. It wants to dominate the planet. It does this through warfare and monopolies, and like I said before, keeping everybody else destitute. And so none of this surprises me. Who is surprised that President Donald Trump is going to just continue the U.S. war on Russia via Ukraine? Who's surprised? I told people that this was what was going to happen. This is literally what was written in Project 2025. The war was never meant to stop. There was no genuine attempt at peace. It was to get Europe to play a more active role while the U.S. pivots to China. But it was never the intention to ever stop the war in Ukraine. Freeze it at most, and that's it. And even before President Trump, the White House announced that they're prepared to sell Ukraine up to, I think it's $50 million or more dollars in weapons. Just think about that, though. What money is Ukraine paying for these weapons with? The money that the U.S. and Europe are keeping the economy afloat with. So in essence, you're just still giving weapons to Ukraine, just like the Biden administration was doing. You're just changing the wording, superficially making it appear as if this is transactional, when in reality, it is just continuity of agenda. You have to keep Russia pinned down in Ukraine, overextended in Ukraine, so that it is unable to help with Iran or with China, two of Russia's close allies. And now with Iran, again, there's no surprise here. Did anyone actually think the U.S. was interested in peace with Iran? Why would anyone think that, especially under the Trump administration? I mean, even with the theater of a two-party system, President Trump is the least believable candidate for any attempt at peace with Iran. And again, in the policy papers, pursuing diplomacy with Iran is meant to make it appear as if the U.S. is being the reasonable one, and that it is Iran intent on conflict, intent on getting nuclear weapons for all of the wrong reasons, leaving the U.S. with no choice but to resort to military might or more drastic measures against Iran. And this is in these policy papers. I always go back to the 2009 Which Path to Persia paper from the Brookings Institution. There's a whole chapter titled "Leave It to Bibi," allowing or encouraging an Israeli strike on Iran. So the U.S. wants to absolve itself from responsibility, have Israel carry out this strike, take all of the fallout for that, and the U.S. benefit from it. Exactly like how they're using Ukraine against Russia, or how they are trying to use the Philippines or the island province of Taiwan against China. And the funniest thing about U.S. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth's whining and complaining about Iran, he's only saying this because of America's inability to subdue Ansar Allah in Yemen. We just watched a U.S. warplane slide off a U.S. aircraft carrier while it was taking evasive maneuvers from incoming Ansar Allah missiles, anti-shipping missiles. So that is the first actual admission. We've heard many claims by Ansar Allah itself that they've been targeting U.S. aircraft carriers. This is the first time the U.S. media has not only admitted it, but has admitted material loss because of Ansar Allah anti-shipping missiles. The other problem that the U.S. has is that they're unable to establish air superiority over Yemen. And we're not talking about Iran, we're talking about Yemen, which has been under siege by the U.S. and its proxies since around 2011. And the reason why is because Ansar Allah has capable air defense systems, not just man-portable systems, but air defense systems that are capable of reaching both U.S. drones and warplanes at their maximum service ceiling. So that means they have these MQ-9 drones flying over, picking targets, guiding munitions to their targets, but Ansar Allah is capable of taking them down. And this forces the F-35s, F-22s, whatever the U.S. is using, this forces them to carry out standoff strikes, meaning they launch missiles well out of range of air defense systems in Yemen. But that means they're using standoff, long-range, precision-guided weapons that are in short supply, and it has limited effectiveness versus just flying over the country and just dropping bombs at will. So if this is the problem the U.S. has run into just in Yemen, what does this say about some sort of conflict, future conflict with Iran or even China, for that matter?
And that's why I wanted to ask you, Carl, will this work? Because a lot of people thought that Donald Trump was going to piece through strength his way into settling some kind of deal with these rising multipolar powers. The United States would act as a normal country. But as we see here, as what Brian just explained, it's actually going full throttle toward escalating against all three of them. And yet Yemen, I mean, they're shooting down F-18s. They said that they've separately shot down an F-18. They've shot down dozens upon dozens of MQ-9 Reapers. How is this going to go for the United States as it moves forward?
Well, I first want to talk about just giving money and weapon to Ukraine, right? That's not charity for Ukraine. That's a charity for the U.S. military-industrial complex. That has always been the goal. Like Julian Assange has said about Afghanistan war. Afghanistan war is never about winning the war. It's about wash the vast sum of the money from the taxpayer basis of the United States and Europe and into the hands of a few minority of transnational security elite. And that's exactly what these proxy wars are designed to do. And this is why they pivot from one war to another, from Iraq, from Afghanistan to Iraq, and now to Ukraine, and now to Yemen. And this is to benefit their buddies in the defense industry, the arms lobby, and and remember, Trump said he will resolve the Ukraine war in the first 24 hours. Well, I mean, none of his reporters is bringing that up again. And remember, back in December 2023, there's a lot of social media posts saying, the Houthis are about to find out why we Americans don't have health care. Now it's a year and a half later. U.S., like I said again, U.S. has no capacity to actually take on a peer competitor, near peer competitor. I mean, forget about China or even Iran. They even have problem dealing with Yemenis, and also the whole Yemeni strike shows the vulnerability of the U.S. aircraft carrier to ballistic missiles. Now, China, they have automatic lights off factories making cruise missiles and ballistic missiles. They're unmanned factories, basically full robotic assembly line making missiles 24/7. You think if you have trouble with Yemen, you think you can go up against that kind of industrial power? It's ridiculous. This is why I said what I said on Twitter. I say U.S. lacks U.S. has no balls and no means to really fight a war against China. And so we're back where we're here today. Is you should have people like Trump throwing up a tantrum in the White House, and Xi Jinping is just completely ignoring him.
Brian, elaborate more on what Carl was talking about, not having the means here, because you do a lot of work on the US's actual military capabilities. What do its capabilities tell us about its actual posture, its ability to wage this multi-front war? And what is the danger here then of where the US will go should it not be able to, as we are already seeing, Yemen, Ukraine, we're already seeing the kind of fractures and cracks in its power. Talk about its actual capacity and what it means for the direction that the US as a hegemon goes in.
Well, I agree with Carl. The United States has no ability at all whatsoever to confront, fight, and defeat China head on. They understand themselves that is impossible. It's not possible now, and it's unlikely it'll ever be possible anytime in the future. And what they're worried about is in the beginning, when the United States reigned supreme over the globe, there was this huge disparity between the U.S., its capabilities, and the rest of the world. And even then, they had problems in places like the Korean Peninsula or in Vietnam or in Afghanistan. I saw someone in the comment section saying, the U.S. hasn't played its real hand in Yemen yet. Well, they haven't played their real hand in many conflicts, I guess, for decades now. When will they play their real hand? I don't know. The problem is that disparity has not just narrowed, but now it is increasing again, but in favor of nations like China. The technological playing field is being leveled, and in some ways, nations like Russia, China, even in some instances, Iran, are developing capabilities the U.S. doesn't have. It's not that they couldn't develop it, but the system that the U.S. has in place is incapable of doing it. Now, the problem is the United States realizes this, and they have adopted an asymmetrical strategy to deal with China, also with Russia, also with Iran. And we saw this strategy play out successfully in Syria, for example. That was a proxy war. The U.S. was waging war against Syria by proxy. They initially failed. They managed to freeze the conflict. They continued hollowing out the Syrian government, economy, and military until last December. It finally all collapsed. And that was despite Russia and Iran offering assistance to Syria. There just wasn't anything left to prop up after a while. And this is what the U.S. is now attempting to replicate in Ukraine. They can't win the proxy war now. They're losing it, obviously. They want to freeze it until a time in the future where they believe factors may lean in their favor again. And now with China, Carl mentioned that the U.S. is waging a war against China already. And he said economically, I would go further in saying the U.S. is already killing Chinese citizens and destroying Chinese infrastructure, but again, by proxy. I've been following the news in Balochistan, southwest Pakistan, since 2011 about there. And the U.S. is backing armed militants there who have been consistently targeting the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, part of the Belt and Road Initiative that runs from China down through Pakistan to Gwadar Port in Balochistan. These armed militants backed by the U.S. regularly kill Chinese engineers. So we're talking about a U.S. proxy war killing Chinese citizens. They also made an attempt to kill the Chinese ambassador to Pakistan. In Myanmar, here in Southeast Asia, Thailand's neighbor to the west, there is an ongoing, decade-spanning war against the central government. This is also backed by the U.S. These militants have also attacked Chinese infrastructure and investments. They have repeatedly tried to strike at these pipelines. These pipelines go from the coast of Myanmar to Kunming in southern China. And this is so that China can send hydrocarbons to China without having to go all the way through the South China Sea, the Malacca Strait, which are potential choke points in a U.S. maritime blockade against Chinese shipping. And this is what the United States is preparing to do, a global maritime blockade against China. This is why there's this obsession with Panama, with Greenland, with the Malacca Strait, the South China Sea. And the U.S. is involved in the Middle East, not because it wants the hydrocarbons there for itself, but so that it can disrupt its flow to places like the Chinese economy. And so they don't necessarily have to win a war against China to deal a devastating blow to China. They want to disrupt and destroy everything out of reach of the Chinese military, which is designed to protect China in China. Unlike the U.S. military, which is sprawled across the planet, they can use that to their advantage asymmetrically to cut the Chinese economy off by force with the U.S. military. It's an extreme measure, but this is what you can see them setting up. This is why they want a conflict in Taiwan or the Philippines, not because they're going to protect either one of these places. No, they want maximum carnage so that they can tell the world, see what China did, see how evil they are, just like Russia. We need to isolate them. And that will be what they use as a pretext to impose a maritime blockade worldwide.
Yeah, and Carl, I guess given what Brian said, will it work? All of these maneuvers and means, this asymmetric warfare, the sanctions, and it's happening at such a wide level now. The United States is casting a huge net, attempting to stifle these powers. Will it work?
Well, no, I think Brian is absolutely right. I mean, U.S. do have advantage in these fomenting color revolutions, regime change. That's why U.S. prefer to create failed states. This is where they can stir up trouble. But it's less effective in a highly function state, against a highly function state directly. For example, CIA just came out with a Mandarin recruiting video, targeting Chinese officials. And I just watched it. Someone used AI to translate, but it's English subtitles, so I posted for my Anglophone audience. He actually present this guy who live a pretty comfortable life. He has a nice car, nice apartment, he has a family, but yet he's talking about, I work so hard, but you only accrues to the wealth of a few. This cannot go on. I need to find more purpose in life. And then in the end, you have him to texting, signing up the CIA website to be an informant. So I'm looking at this video. I'm like, okay, it shows this Chinese guy living a pretty decent life with a nice car, nice family, nice apartment. And the problem he's describes the United States to a T. It's about like the 1% taking up everything from the 99%. What are they trying to do here? So while U.S. have very great success in some cases of fomenting unrest around the world, but right now U.S. is facing the greatest instability in its at home because, like I said, a lot of the U.S. empire problem is actually self-inflicted. You have now Trump is basically embargoing the United States through his tariff policies, and he has effectively turned the rest of the world, shift the world's opinions against the U.S. There's actually a recent global, I think it was Gallup poll that showed the perception of China actually are slightly turning positive in the U.S., but it's also a changing, around the world because this is Trump's doing. In the matter of a few weeks, after he slapped a slapped tariff against the rest of the world, and then he said he's really want to isolate China and need people's help, and even Japan said no. Right now, China looks like a stable country, a country for stability on the world stage, whereas U.S. is this rogue regime that's creating instability. It's obvious for everyone right now. So U.S. is actually making it harder for itself to continue to be the force of mischief around the world because the U.S. capacity will be severely constrained in the coming years, especially after we have go through the consequences of Trump's actions, with now China sanctioning U.S. on the rare earth exports. U.S. military industrial complex needs those rare earth to get into the components of their weapon parts. What are they going to do? What are they going to do in the next 4 to 5 years? I do not believe for a moment they will be able to find. I mean, eventually, eventually maybe they can build the supply chain in 10 years. I believe that, but what are they going to do in the next 4 to 5 years? They're sabotaging. They're shooting. Don't interrupt your enemy when they're shooting themselves in the foot. I think this is why Xi Jinping is not calling.
Yeah, Brian. Any Any final thoughts on this? Because a big theme here too with these sanctions are this continued notion that if you can isolate China, if you can isolate Russia, if you can isolate Iran, then that somehow is going to lead to the collapse that will prevent the need to use this depleted military in a big way. That doesn't seem to be working out very well, though. Maybe you can close this segment on this.
Well, I just wanted to mention, I forgot to mention the situation in Xinjiang inside China's borders. That was also the United States. The U.S. was killing hundreds, maybe thousands of Chinese citizens, both Uyghur minorities and everyone else in China, by backing this separatist movement. And that was terrorism that spread across the rest of China, outside of Xinjiang, and even across the rest of Asia. There was a terrorist attack here in Bangkok, Thailand, where I'm based, a place I used to walk by very often, actually killed 20 plus people. And then a lot of those terrorists were transplanted into Syria, where they helped overthrow the Syrian government there. So this is what I'm talking about, the threat the U.S. poses. And then Carl was talking about the military-industrial base and creating their own supply chains to make up for inputs that China is no longer allowing to be exported to the U.S. I just want to point out, all throughout the conflict with Russia in Ukraine, the U.S. has been waging. They have had to expand their military-industrial production, and they have completely failed. And this is 3 going on to 4 years, and they have utterly failed to expand military production to win their own proxy war against Russia in Ukraine. And if it's that desperate and they're still failing to do it, what makes anyone think that they're going to somehow overcome this in any other area, especially when the threat isn't as immediately urgent as it is in an ongoing proxy war? So there's all of this for people to think about. At the end of the day, I would warn people against underestimating America's capacity to create death and destruction, to destabilize. It is always easier to destroy than it is to build up. I would say here in Southeast Asia, it's obvious for every single person living here, your option between subordinating yourself to the US and being used as the next Ukraine versus just cooperating and rising together with China. I've been here my entire adult life, just about, and I have watched the transformation take place. Carl was actually just here in Thailand not that long ago, and he saw the level of development that has taken place since the last time he was here, which was about the first time I was here. And it is such a transformation, and it is only possible because of the rise of China. Otherwise, if the US had its say here in Thailand, Thailand would look like the Philippines, which is drastically underdeveloped for the region, has a larger population, a much larger population than Thailand, but a smaller GDP. But what I would warn against is the fact that just because it is in the national interests to cooperate with China and to reject the US and its interference, just like Europe has proven from 2014 onward, despite it being completely against their best interests, even their own self-preservation, they have gone along with this US proxy war against Russia. They have cut their economies off from Russia. The German economy is deindustrializing because of this. It is collective suicide as a continent, just about. And how did the US achieve that? Through politically capturing these countries, these governments, their institutions, their education system, their media space. And this is a problem that Southeast Asia right now has, is they have not secured their information space, their education system, or their political system from US interference, despite everyone claiming President Trump has dismantled regime change tools worldwide. They're still very much intact and in use and being used against these countries. I can see the US-backed opposition party going up and down the streets during local elections. They're still very active and they're still working their way in, and their agenda is still to turn the Thai people against China, which is also the same as turning the Thai people against their own best interests, just like the US has succeeded, not just in Ukraine, but across wider Europe. And I fear that this is kind of the reason. Yes, we see Japan and South Korea kind of pushing back, just like Germany was pushing back from 2014 onward. But ultimately, at the end of the day, when the final decision has to be made, the US still has that ability to compel them to choose against their own best interests rather than choose their best interests.